In the heart of downtown Millbrook, where towering glass buildings cast long shadows over modest apartment complexes, a simple misunderstanding is about to spark a connection that will change two lives forever. When exhausted nurse Lily Ashford orders takeout after a brutal 16-hour shift, she expects nothing more than hot food and a quiet evening. What she doesn't expect is that the man at her door, wearing a wrinkled delivery uniform and riding a beat-up motorcycle, isn't actually a delivery driver at all. He's Ethan Vale, the reclusive billionaire CEO of Vale Industries, one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. Tonight, for reasons that will soon unfold, he's traded his corner office for a crash course in ordinary life, delivering food to strangers who have no idea they're tipping one of the richest men in America. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. As Lily opens her apartment door to find this charming, slightly awkward delivery guy standing in the hallway with her order, neither realizes that this chance encounter will unravel carefully constructed lives and reveal truths neither is prepared to face. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the most ordinary moments, like a tired woman, a mistaken identity, and a meal that arrives exactly when both hearts need it most. Before we dive into this incredible journey, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And trust me, you'll want to hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will restore your faith in the magic of unexpected connections. The rain hammered against the windows of Mercy General Hospital as Lily Ashford finally clocked out from her shift. 16 hours of non-stop patient care had left her feet aching and her scrubs stained with the evidence of a particularly challenging day in the pediatric ward. 3 emergency admissions, 2 code blues, and 1 successful resuscitation had drained every ounce of energy from her petite frame. Yet despite the exhaustion etched into her hazel eyes, there was something unbreakable about Lily, a warmth that no amount of hospital stress could extinguish. She pulled her auburn hair from its practical ponytail, letting it fall in tired waves around her shoulders as she walked through the hospital's automatic doors. The November air bit at her cheeks and she pulled her worn jacket tighter. Her ancient Honda Civic sat in the far corner of the employee parking lot, faithful despite its 200,000 miles and the concerning rattling sound it had developed last month. Car repairs weren't in the budget, not when her younger brother Jake's college tuition took priority, and certainly not when she was still paying off her own nursing school loans. The drive to her studio apartment in the Riverside district took 20 minutes through rain-slicked streets. Riverside wasn't the safest neighborhood in Millbrook, but it was what she could afford on a nurse's salary. The building was old but clean, with neighbors who looked out for each other. Mrs. Chen on the first floor always saved her packages, and the college students across the hall kept the noise down during her day sleeps between night shifts. Lily's apartment was small but cozy, a sanctuary she'd created with secondhand furniture, clearance rack throw pillows, and photographs from her travels during nursing school. The walls were covered with thank you cards from patients' families, artwork from the children in her ward, and a few precious photos of her and Jake at his high school graduation. A small bookshelf overflowed with medical journals, romance novels, and the occasional cookbook she optimistically bought but rarely had time to use. Tonight was definitely a takeout night. She scrolled through her phone, settling on Golden Dragon, a Chinese restaurant that had become her go-to for comfort food. The woman who answered the phone recognized her voice immediately, a regular customer who always ordered the same thing: beef and broccoli, fried rice, and an egg roll. Simple, filling, and enough for tomorrow's lunch too. As she waited for her food, Lily peeled off her scrubs and took a hot shower, letting the water wash away the stress of the day. She thought about Tommy, the 8-year-old who'd come in with appendicitis, how scared he'd been until she distracted him with stories about brave knights and magical healing potions. She thought about his mother's tears of relief when the surgery went perfectly, the way she'd hugged Lily like she was family. These moments, these human connections, were why she'd chosen nursing despite the long hours, modest pay, and emotional toll. Wrapped in her favorite oversized sweater and fuzzy socks, Lily settled onto her couch with a cup of chamomile tea. The rain continued its steady rhythm against her windows, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety in her small space. She checked her phone. Her food should arrive any minute. She'd tip well, as always. Working in service herself, she understood the importance of treating others with kindness, especially on nights like this, when the weather made every delivery a challenge. What Lily didn't know was that across town, in a penthouse office overlooking the glittering cityscape of Millbrook's financial district, a very different kind of exhaustion was taking its toll on someone else. Someone who, in exactly 17 minutes, would be standing at her door wearing a delivery uniform and carrying her dinner, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything both of them thought they knew about love, identity, and the courage it takes to be truly vulnerable with another human being. The doorbell would ring soon, and when it did, Lily Ashford's quiet evening would transform into the beginning of the most unexpected love story of her life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through Lily's dreams at 5:30 a.m., dragging her back to reality after only 4 hours of sleep. She'd been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, covering for 2 nurses who'd quit without notice. The nursing shortage at Mercy General had reached crisis levels, leaving the remaining staff stretched impossibly thin. Lily rolled over, her body protesting every movement as she reached for her phone to silence the alarm. 17 missed calls from Jake's college. Her heart stopped. With trembling fingers she called back, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Had something happened to her brother? Was he hurt? Sick? The receptionist's voice was professional but strained when she finally connected. "Miss Ashford, this is regarding your brother Jake's account. His tuition payment for this semester is now 60 days overdue. If we don't receive payment by Friday, he'll be dropped from his classes and lose his scholarship eligibility." The words hit her like a physical blow. Lily sank onto the edge of her bed, calculating numbers she'd calculated 1,000 times before. Even with picking up every available overtime shift, even with skipping meals and walking instead of driving when possible, she was still $3,200 short. Jake's pre-med program at Millbrook University was his ticket to a better life, the chance their family had never had. Their father had left when Jake was 12, and their mother had worked 3 jobs until cancer took her 2 years ago, leaving Lily to become both sister and guardian to a brilliant boy who deserved every opportunity she could give him. "I'll have the money by Friday," she heard herself say, though she had no idea how. "Please don't drop him. He's worked so hard for this." After hanging up, Lily sat in the pre-dawn darkness of her studio apartment, surrounded by the weight of responsibility. On her nightstand sat a photo of her and Jake at his high school graduation, both of them grinning, full of hope and dreams. She'd promised their dying mother she'd make sure Jake became the doctor he'd always wanted to be. It was a promise she intended to keep, no matter what it cost her. Her morning routine was efficient and practiced. Shower in 3 minutes to save on the electric bill. Coffee from the discount brand she bought in bulk. Breakfast was a granola bar eaten while reviewing her patient charts from yesterday. She'd learned to function on minimal sleep and maximum caffeine, though her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed the toll it was taking. Dark circles shadowed her hazel eyes, and she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose from her already slender frame. The drive to Mercy General took her through 3 distinct sections of Millbrook. First, the struggling Riverside district where she lived, a patchwork of working families, elderly residents on fixed incomes, and young people like herself trying to build something from nothing. Then came Millbrook Heights, where tree-lined streets showcased modest middle-class homes with neat gardens and 2-car garages. Finally, as she approached the hospital, she caught glimpses of the gleaming towers of the financial district in the distance, a world that might as well have been on another planet for all its relevance to her daily struggles. At the hospital, Lily transformed into the nurse her patients needed her to be. Despite her exhaustion and worry, she greeted each child in the pediatric ward with genuine warmth. There was 7-year-old Emma, recovering from a broken leg, who always asked Lily to braid her hair. Miguel, 10, battling leukemia with the fierce determination of a warrior, who'd taught himself magic tricks to entertain the other kids. And today, a new admission, 5-year-old Grace, scared and crying after emergency appendix surgery, whose parents were stuck in traffic from 3 hours away. "It hurts," Grace whispered, clutching Lily's hand with surprising strength. "I know, sweetheart," Lily said softly, adjusting the child's blanket. "But you know what? You're one of the bravest kids I've ever met. Want to hear about the magical healing garden where all the best nurses learn their superpowers?" For 20 minutes, Lily spun an elaborate tale about a secret garden where nurses trained to become healing heroes, complete with talking flowers that taught different medical skills and friendly animals who helped children feel better. Grace's tears dried up, replaced by wide-eyed wonder and the kind of innocent questions that reminded Lily why she'd chosen this profession, despite its challenges. Dr. Peterson, the head of pediatrics, found her during her break. "Lily, I know you've been covering extra shifts, but Sarah called in sick again. Any chance you could stay late tonight? I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate." Another 12 hours. Another day of putting her own needs aside. But looking at the ward full of children who depended on them, Lily nodded. Of course. These kids need us. What she didn't say was that the overtime pay might just be enough to make a dent in Jake's tuition bill. Every extra hour was a step closer to keeping her promise, to ensuring her brother's dreams didn't die with their mother's unfulfilled hopes. As the day wore on, Lily moved through her tasks with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, administering medications, comforting frightened children and worried parents. She was good at her job, exceptional even, but the constant pressure was wearing her down in ways she tried not to acknowledge. When was the last time she'd gone out with friends? When had she last read a book for pleasure or watched a movie? When had she last done anything just for herself? The answers to those questions would have to wait. Right now, there were patients to care for, bills to pay, and a brother's future to secure. As evening approached and another long shift stretched ahead, Lily steeled herself for what felt like an endless cycle of work, worry, and sacrifice. She had no way of knowing that tonight, when she finally dragged herself home after 16 grueling hours, a simple dinner order would set in motion events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about struggle, kindness, and the unexpected ways love can find us when we need it most. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through Lily's dreams at 5:30 a.m., dragging her back to reality after only 4 hours of sleep. She'd been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, covering for 2 nurses who'd quit without notice. The nursing shortage at Mercy General had reached crisis levels, leaving the remaining staff stretched impossibly thin. Lily rolled over, her body protesting every movement as she reached for her phone to silence the alarm. 17 missed calls from Jake's college. Her heart stopped. With trembling fingers, she called back, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Had something happened to her brother? Was he hurt? Sick? The receptionist's voice was professional, but strained when she finally connected. "Miss Ashford, this is regarding your brother Jake's account. His tuition payment for this semester is now 60 days overdue. If we don't receive payment by Friday, he'll be dropped from his classes and lose his scholarship eligibility." The words hit her like a physical blow. Lily sank onto the edge of her bed, calculating numbers she'd calculated 1,000 times before. Even with picking up every available overtime shift, even with skipping meals and walking instead of driving when possible, she was still $3,200 short. Jake's pre-med program at Millbrook University was his ticket to a better life, the chance their family had never had. Their father had left when Jake was 12, and their mother had worked 3 jobs until cancer took her 2 years ago, leaving Lily to become both sister and guardian to a brilliant boy who deserved every opportunity she could give him. "I'll have the money by Friday," she heard herself say, though she had no idea how. "Please don't drop him. He's worked so hard for this." After hanging up, Lily sat in the pre-dawn darkness of her studio apartment, surrounded by the weight of responsibility. On her nightstand sat a photo of her and Jake at his high school graduation, both of them grinning, full of hope and dreams. She'd promised their dying mother she'd make sure Jake became the doctor he'd always wanted to be. It was a promise she intended to keep, no matter what it cost her. Her morning routine was efficient and practiced. Shower in 3 minutes to save on the electric bill. Coffee from the discount brand she bought in bulk. Breakfast was a granola bar eaten while reviewing her patient charts from yesterday. She'd learned to function on minimal sleep and maximum caffeine, though her reflection in the bathroom mirror showed the toll it was taking. Dark circles shadowed her hazel eyes, and she'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose from her already slender frame. The drive to Mercy General took her through 3 distinct sections of Millbrook. First, the struggling Riverside district where she lived, a patchwork of working families, elderly residents on fixed incomes, and young people like herself trying to build something from nothing. Then came Millbrook Heights, where tree-lined streets showcased modest middle-class homes with neat gardens and 2-car garages. Finally, as she approached the hospital, she caught glimpses of the gleaming towers of the financial district in the distance, a world that might as well have been on another planet for all its relevance to her daily struggles. At the hospital, Lily transformed into the nurse her patients needed her to be. Despite her exhaustion and worry, she greeted each child in the pediatric ward with genuine warmth. There was 7-year-old Emma, recovering from a broken leg, who always asked Lily to braid her hair. Miguel, 10, battling leukemia with the fierce determination of a warrior who'd taught himself magic tricks to entertain the other kids. And today, a new admission, 5-year-old Grace, scared and crying after emergency appendix surgery, whose parents were stuck in traffic from 3 hours away. "It hurts," Grace whispered, clutching Lily's hand with surprising strength. "I know, sweetheart," Lily said softly, adjusting the child's blanket. "But you know what? You're one of the bravest kids I've ever met. Want to hear about the magical healing garden where all the best nurses learn their superpowers?" For 20 minutes, Lily spun an elaborate tale about a secret garden where nurses trained to become healing heroes, complete with talking flowers that taught different medical skills and friendly animals who helped children feel better. Grace's tears dried up, replaced by wide-eyed wonder and the kind of innocent questions that reminded Lily why she'd chosen this profession despite its challenges. Dr. Peterson, the head of pediatrics, found her during her break. "Lily, I know you've been covering extra shifts, but Sarah called in sick again. Any chance you could stay late tonight? I wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate." Another 12 hours. Another day of putting her own needs aside. But looking at the ward full of children who depended on them, Lily nodded. "Of course. These kids need us." What she didn't say was that the overtime pay might just be enough to make a dent in Jake's tuition bill. Every extra hour was a step closer to keeping her promise, to ensuring her brother's dreams didn't die with their mother's unfulfilled hopes. As the day wore on, Lily moved through her tasks with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, administering medications, comforting frightened children and worried parents. She was good at her job, exceptional even, but the constant pressure was wearing her down in ways she tried not to acknowledge. When was the last time she'd gone out with friends? When had she last read a book for pleasure or watched a movie? When had she last done anything just for herself? The answers to those questions would have to wait. Right now, there were patients to care for, bills to pay, and a brother's future to secure. As evening approached and another long shift stretched ahead, Lily steeled herself for what felt like an endless cycle of work, worry, and sacrifice. She had no way of knowing that tonight, when she finally dragged herself home after 16 grueling hours, a simple dinner order would set in motion events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about struggle, kindness, and the unexpected ways love can find us when we need it most. 30 floors above the bustling streets of Millbrook's financial district, Ethan Vale stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the city pulse with evening life far below. From this height, the people looked like moving dots, their struggles and dreams invisible from his ivory tower. At 32, Ethan had built Vale Industries from a college dorm room startup into a tech empire worth billions, revolutionizing cloud computing and artificial intelligence in ways that had earned him comparisons to the great innovators of Silicon Valley. Yet tonight, staring at his reflection in the glass, he felt more isolated than ever. The boardroom behind him still hummed with tension from the emergency meeting that had just concluded. The acquisition of Meridian Technologies, a deal worth $2.8 billion, hung in the balance, threatened by a hostile takeover attempt from their biggest competitor, Apex Corporation. His board of directors, led by the calculating Victoria Sterling, had made their position clear: accept Apex's counteroffer to merge Vale Industries, or risk losing everything in a prolonged corporate war. "Think about your shareholders, Ethan," Victoria had said, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the mahogany conference table. "Think about the employees who depend on stable leadership. Your father built this company on practical decisions, not romantic ideals about independence." The mention of his father always hit like a calculated blow. Richard Vale had indeed built the foundation of what became Vale Industries, but he'd also built it on the backs of employees he'd laid off during every economic downturn, on environmental corners cut to maximize profits, on a philosophy that put shareholder value above human value. When Ethan inherited control 5 years ago after his father's sudden heart attack, he'd sworn to do things differently. He'd implemented profit-sharing programs, green energy initiatives, and workplace wellness policies that had made Vale Industries one of the most sought-after employers in the tech sector. But doing things differently had also made him enemies. The old guard of executives who'd served under his father resented his bleeding heart policies. Competitors saw his employee-first approach as weakness to be exploited. And now, facing the biggest crisis of his career, Ethan found himself questioning everything he'd built. Earlier, his personal assistant, David Chang, knocked softly on the office door. "Mr. Vale? The car is waiting to take you to the Sterling Foundation Gala. You're expected to give the keynote address in 2 hours." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of expectation pressing down like a physical force. The Sterling Foundation Gala, named after Victoria's philanthropic organization, was Millbrook's premier social event, where the city's elite gathered to write tax-deductible checks and congratulate themselves on their generosity. He would be expected to smile, make small talk about stock prices and vacation homes, and deliver a speech about corporate responsibility to people who saw charity as a public relations strategy. "David," Ethan said without turning around, "what do you know about the neighborhoods around Mercy General Hospital?" His assistant blinked in surprise. "Sir?" "Well, it's primarily working-class families, I believe. Some students from Millbrook University, why do you ask?" "Just curious." Ethan moved to his desk, where a stack of documents waited for his signature. Employment termination notices for 847 employees. Collateral damage from the corporate restructuring Victoria insisted was necessary to make the company more attractive to potential buyers. Each page represented a family, a person with dreams and responsibilities, someone who would go home tonight not knowing their job was about to disappear. He'd been raised in the insulated world of private schools and country clubs, groomed from birth to take over the family empire. His childhood memories were of nannies instead of parents, of business dinners instead of family meals, of learning that emotional connections were liabilities in the corporate world. Even his romantic relationships had been strategic. Board members' daughters, fellow CEOs, women who understood that love was secondary to maintaining appearances and networking opportunities. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd built a company focused on connecting people through technology while becoming increasingly disconnected from any genuine human relationships himself. His penthouse apartment was a showcase of expensive minimalism, all clean lines and designer furniture that no one ever used because he rarely entertained guests. His social circle consisted entirely of business associates who would abandon him the moment his stock price dropped. On his desk sat a framed photo from last year's company picnic. Hundreds of Vale Industries employees and their families gathered in Riverside Park, laughing and enjoying a rare day when the corporate hierarchy dissolved into simple human connection. He remembered walking among them, watching children play on the swings while their parents, his employees, talked about school events and weekend plans, and all the ordinary magic of regular life. For a few hours he'd felt like he belonged somewhere real. "Sir?" David's voice broke through his reverie. "The car really is waiting. Traffic to the Grandview Hotel will be heavy tonight." Ethan looked at the termination documents, then at the photo, then at his own reflection in the dark window. A crazy idea began forming in his mind, an impulse so unlike his usual calculated decision-making that it scared him. "David, cancel the car. And call the gala organizers. Tell them I've had a family emergency and won't be able to attend." "Sir, but you're the keynote speaker." "Make something up. You're good at that." Ethan was already loosening his tie, pulling off his jacket. "And David? Lock these termination notices in the safe. Don't file them until I say so." In his private bathroom, Ethan stared at his closet full of identical expensive suits. Hidden in the back, behind clothes that had cost more than most people made in a month, he found what he was looking for. Old jeans and a simple shirt from his college days, clothes he'd kept for reasons he'd never fully understood. As he changed, shedding his corporate armor, he felt something shift inside him. Tonight, he decided, he was going to find out what life looked like from ground level. He was going to disappear into the ordinary world and remember what it felt like to be human. What he didn't know was that this impulsive decision would lead him to a modest apartment building in the Riverside district, where an exhausted nurse named Lily Ashford was about to place an order for Chinese takeout, and where a case of mistaken identity would change both their lives forever. The rain had intensified by the time Ethan reached the Riverside district. His motorcycle, a vintage Harley he'd bought in college and rarely had time to ride, cutting through the wet streets with surprising agility. He'd borrowed the delivery uniform from Golden Dragon's manager, Tommy Chen, an old college friend who owed him a favor from their startup days together. Tommy had been skeptical, but ultimately amused by Ethan's request to experience the service industry firsthand for market research. If only he knew the truth. The uniform was slightly too small, the polyester fabric clinging uncomfortably to his shoulders, and the helmet had seen better days. But for the first time in months, Ethan felt genuinely excited about something. Every delivery was a small adventure, a glimpse into lives completely different from his own. In the past 3 hours, he'd brought dinner to a young mother juggling twins, an elderly man celebrating his 80th birthday alone, and a group of college students cramming for finals. Each interaction had been brief but real, in a way his corporate meetings never were. Now, consulting the rain-spotted delivery slip in his hand, he stood outside Riverside Gardens Apartments, a modest brick building that had clearly seen decades of faithful service. The address belonged to Lily Ashford, apartment 4B. According to the order, she'd requested beef and broccoli, fried rice, and an egg roll, simple comfort food on a night when comfort seemed necessary. The building's entrance required a buzzer, and Ethan fumbled with the intercom system, his hands stiff from the cold rain. When he pressed 4B, a tired but pleasant voice crackled through the speaker. "Hello?" "Food delivery from Golden Dragon," Ethan said, trying to sound casual, despite the strange thrill of playing this role. "Oh, thank goodness. I'll buzz you up. 4th floor. Take a left." The elevator was out of order, according to a handwritten sign taped to the doors, so Ethan climbed the narrow staircase, the aroma of Chinese food wafting from the insulated bag. The building was quiet except for the distant sound of a television and someone playing piano, a melancholy melody that echoed through the thin walls. It was so different from his sterile penthouse, where the only sounds were the hum of expensive appliances and the distant rumble of traffic far below. By the time he reached the 4th floor, Ethan was slightly winded, a reminder that his gym membership was more theoretical than practical. He found apartment 4B and knocked softly, shifting the food bag to his other hand while rain dripped from his jacket onto the worn carpeting. The door opened, and Ethan found himself face to face with the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. She wasn't beautiful in the polished, calculated way of the women in his usual social circle. There were no designer clothes or professional makeup here. Instead, she wore an oversized sweater that had clearly seen many washings, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun with soft tendrils framing her face. But it was her eyes that stopped him completely. Hazel eyes that held exhaustion and kindness in equal measure, eyes that looked at him with genuine warmth despite her obvious fatigue. "Perfect timing," she said with a smile that transformed her entire face. "I was starting to think you'd gotten lost in this weather." Ethan realized he'd been staring and quickly held up the food bag. "1 beef and broccoli, fried rice, and an egg roll. That'll be $18.50. As she reached for her wallet, Ethan noticed her hands. Small and graceful, but with the kind of competent efficiency that spoke of someone accustomed to helping others. She wore scrubs underneath the sweater, and he caught a glimpse of a hospital ID badge hanging from a lanyard around her neck. "You work at Mercy General?" he found himself asking, immediately regretting the personal question. Delivery drivers probably weren't supposed to make conversation. "Pediatric ward," she confirmed, counting out bills and adding a generous tip. "Just finished a double shift. Hence the desperate need for food I didn't have to cook myself." Something in her voice, a note of genuine exhaustion mixed with dedication, made Ethan want to know more. That must be challenging work. Lily paused in the doorway, studying his face with curious interest. "It is, but it's worth it. Those kids, they have this amazing resilience. They can find joy in the smallest things, even when they're scared or hurting." Her expression softened. "Sorry, you probably don't need to hear about my day. I'm sure you have other deliveries to make." But Ethan found he didn't want to leave. There was something about this woman, this Lily, according to the order slip, that drew him in. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, not as a service provider but as a person worth talking to. Maybe it was the genuine warmth in her voice when she spoke about her patients. Or maybe it was simply that, for the first time in years, he was having a conversation that wasn't about stock prices or corporate strategy. "Actually," he said, surprising himself, "this is my last delivery of the night. The weather's getting pretty bad out there." As if to emphasize his point, a flash of lightning illuminated the hallway, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that rattled the windows. Lily glanced toward the stairwell, where they could hear rain drumming against the roof. "You're driving in this?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "That seems dangerous, especially on a motorcycle." The fact that she was worried about a stranger's safety, despite her obvious exhaustion, said everything Ethan needed to know about her character. In his world, people rarely showed concern for anyone outside their immediate circle of benefit. "I'll be careful," he assured her, though the thought of riding back through the storm wasn't particularly appealing. Lily hesitated, clearly wrestling with some internal debate. Then, in a gesture that would haunt Ethan's dreams for weeks to come, she stepped back and opened her door wider. "Look, I know this might sound crazy, but would you like to come in for a few minutes? At least until the worst of the storm passes? I just made coffee, and you look like you could use something warm." Ethan stared at her, momentarily speechless. In his experience, people didn't invite strangers into their homes, especially not delivery drivers they'd just met. The gesture was so trusting, so inherently kind, that it took his breath away. "I wouldn't want to impose," he managed. "You wouldn't be. Honestly, after the day I've had, I could use the company." She smiled again, that transformative expression that seemed to light up the dim hallway. "Besides, my grandmother always said good karma comes to those who show kindness to travelers in storms." Standing in that modest hallway, rain-soaked and wearing a borrowed uniform, Ethan Vale made a decision that would change everything. He stepped across the threshold into Lily Ashford's small apartment, leaving behind not just the storm outside but the careful walls he'd built around his heart. Neither of them could have predicted that this simple act of hospitality would set in motion a love story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about trust, identity, and the courage it takes to be vulnerable with another human being. Lily's apartment was everything Ethan's penthouse wasn't: warm, lived in, and unmistakably human. The space was small but thoughtfully arranged, with a cozy reading nook by the window, bookshelves lined with worn paperbacks and medical journals, and walls covered with children's artwork and thank you cards. A soft throw blanket was draped over a second-hand couch, and the coffee table held a half-finished crossword puzzle and a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. "Sorry about the mess," Lily said, quickly gathering up some papers from the kitchen counter. Ethan caught a glimpse of what looked like medical bills and tuition payment plans before she tucked them into a drawer. "I wasn't expecting company." "It's perfect," Ethan said, and meant it. The apartment felt more like home than anywhere he'd lived in years. "You have a beautiful place." Lily laughed, a musical sound that made something warm unfurl in his chest. "You're very kind, but I'm pretty sure beautiful isn't the word most people would use for a studio apartment in Riverside." She moved to the small kitchen area, pulling out 2 mismatched mugs. "Coffee okay? Fair warning, it's the cheap stuff, but it's strong." "Coffee sounds great." Ethan found himself genuinely curious about this woman who could make a cramped apartment feel more welcoming than his multi-million-dollar penthouse. "How long have you lived here?" 3 years, ever since I graduated nursing school." Lily poured the coffee, adding sugar to both cups without asking, a small domestic gesture that felt surprisingly intimate. "It's not much, but it's mine, you know? Well, mine and the bank's." She handed him a mug, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Ethan, and from the way Lily's eyes widened slightly, he suspected she felt it too. "So," she said, settling onto the couch and tucking her legs underneath her, "how long have you been doing delivery work?" The question should have been simple, but it made Ethan's stomach clench with the weight of his deception. "Not long," he said carefully. "It's temporary, while I figure out what I really want to do." "I get that. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns." Lily's expression grew thoughtful. "I always thought I'd be working in a big city hospital by now, maybe even traveling with Doctors Without Borders. But then my mom got sick, and my little brother needed help with college, and—" She shrugged, but Ethan could see the shadow of sacrifice in her eyes. Life had other plans. Your brother's in college. Pre-med at Millbrook University. He's brilliant, much smarter than I ever was. He's going to be an incredible doctor someday. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, but so was something else. Worry, perhaps, or the weight of responsibility. Ethan found himself leaning forward, drawn into her story in a way that surprised him. In his world, conversations were strategic, calculated to achieve specific outcomes. This felt different, real and unguarded. That must be expensive, he said gently. Lily's laugh was rueful. You have no idea. Sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy for trying to make it work, but… She looked at a framed photo on the side table. A young man in a graduation cap, beaming with joy. He deserves this chance. Our parents never had opportunities like this, and I'll be damned if I let financial stress steal his dreams. The fierce determination in her voice reminded Ethan of his own drive to build something meaningful, but her motivation was entirely selfless. She wasn't building an empire for personal glory. She was sacrificing her own comfort to lift someone else up. What about your dreams? He asked quietly. The question seemed to catch her off guard. She stared into her coffee cup for a long moment, as if no one had asked her that in years. I suppose. I dream of not worrying about money all the time. Of taking a vacation that isn't just sleeping for 16 hours straight. Of maybe finding someone who understands that my work isn't just a job. It's a calling. She looked up at him, her cheeks slightly pink. Sorry, that probably sounds silly. What about you? What do you dream of doing when you're not delivering Chinese food? The honest answer, that he dreamed of finding meaning beyond profit margins, of connecting with people who saw him as more than his bank account, would have revealed too much. Instead, Ethan found himself sharing a different truth. I dream of building something that matters. Maybe a business that actually helps people, instead of just making money. Something that would make a real difference in the world. That doesn't sound like the typical delivery driver dream, Lily observed with a smile. You talk like someone who's thought seriously about this. Ethan's heart raced as he realized he was walking a dangerous line. Every word felt like both a revelation and a deception. Maybe I have more ambition than sense. Nothing wrong with ambition as long as your heart's in the right place. Lily curled deeper into the couch, and Ethan noticed how the lamplight caught the red highlights in her hair. You know what I love about working with kids? They still believe anything is possible. They haven't learned yet that dreams are supposed to be practical or reasonable. Sometimes I think we could all use a little more of that fearlessness. Thunder rumbled outside, and they both glanced toward the window where rain continued to streak the glass. The storm showed no signs of letting up, but Ethan found he was in no hurry to leave. For the first time in years, he was having a conversation that fed his soul rather than draining it. Can I ask you something? Lily said, her voice softer now. And feel free to tell me it's none of my business, but you don't really seem like a typical delivery driver. The way you speak, the way you carry yourself. I'm usually pretty good at reading people, and you seem like someone who's used to being in charge. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Had he given himself away so easily? He forced himself to meet her perceptive gaze while his mind raced for a plausible explanation. I guess I've always been told I have leadership qualities, he said carefully. Maybe that's why I'm not satisfied with just delivering food forever. Lily nodded, seeming to accept this explanation, but Ethan could see the wheels turning behind her intelligent eyes. She was clearly someone who noticed details, who paid attention to the people around her. How long before she started asking questions he couldn't answer? Well, she said finally, whatever you end up doing, I have a feeling you'll be good at it. There's something about you. She trailed off, looking embarrassed. Sorry, I don't usually analyze strangers who bring me dinner. I don't mind, Ethan said, and realized it was true. When was the last time someone had tried to understand him as a person, rather than as a business opportunity? What else do you see? The question hung between them, charged with a new kind of tension. Lily studied his face with those remarkable hazel eyes, and Ethan felt more exposed than he had in any boardroom negotiation. I see someone who's searching for something, she said quietly. Someone who maybe got a little lost along the way but hasn't given up hope. And I see kindness. Real kindness, not the fake politeness most people wear like armor. Her words hit him like a physical blow. How had this woman, this stranger, seen through to the heart of him so clearly? And how was he supposed to respond when every word felt like both a gift and an accusation? Outside, the storm raged on, but inside Lily's small apartment, something entirely different was beginning to bloom, fragile and dangerous and more real than anything Ethan had experienced in years. Over the next 2 weeks, what began as a chance encounter evolved into something neither Lily nor Ethan had expected. It started with a text message the morning after the storm, Ethan using the number from the delivery receipt to ask if she'd made it to work safely. Then another message asking about her day. Soon, they were exchanging texts throughout their shifts, sharing small moments and observations that somehow felt monumentally important. Ethan found himself looking forward to these messages more than board meetings or profit reports. When Lily texted about a breakthrough with a young patient, or shared a photo of the sunrise from the hospital break room, it anchored him to something real in a way his corporate achievements never had. For her part, Lily discovered that this mysterious delivery driver had an uncanny ability to make her laugh even on her worst days, and an intuitive understanding of the emotional toll her work could take. "You should see this kid Marcus," she texted one afternoon, referring to Ethan by the fake name he'd given her. 7 years old, needs heart surgery, but he's teaching magic tricks to all the other kids to keep their spirits up. Sometimes I think children are braver than adults. Maybe they just haven't learned to be afraid of hope yet, Ethan replied, then immediately worried the response was too philosophical for a delivery driver. But Lily's response was immediate. "That's beautiful. You surprise me sometimes with how you see the world." Those words haunted him through a particularly brutal Vale Industries board meeting, where Victoria Sterling pressed harder than ever for the Apex merger. "Your romantic notions about employee welfare are costing us market share," she'd said coldly. "Sentiment doesn't pay dividends, Ethan." But as he sat in that sterile conference room, all Ethan could think about was Lily's small apartment filled with thank you cards from patients, and how much more meaningful those seemed than any dividend check. Their first official date happened almost by accident. Lily had mentioned working an extra Saturday shift to cover for a colleague, and Ethan found himself offering to bring her lunch during her break. When he arrived at Mercy General wearing his delivery uniform, she met him in the hospital cafeteria with a tired smile that made his heart skip. "You didn't have to do this," she said, accepting the sandwich and coffee he'd brought from a nearby deli. "But I'm so glad you did. It's been one of those days." They sat at a corner table surrounded by the controlled chaos of a busy hospital. Lily told him about her morning, a successful surgery on a child with a rare condition, a family reunion in the pediatric ward, the small victories that made the difficult days worthwhile. Ethan found himself sharing stories too, carefully edited versions of his own experiences that he framed as observations from his delivery routes. "You know what I love about this job?" Lily said, gesturing around the cafeteria where doctors, nurses, and support staff grabbed quick meals between crises. "Every single person here chose to spend their life helping others. Sure, we complain about the hours and the pay, but deep down, we're all here because we believe in something bigger than ourselves." Ethan thought about his own company, where most employees talked about stock options and retirement plans rather than purpose and meaning. That must be incredible, working with people who share your values. It is, though sometimes I wonder what it would be like to work somewhere with better resources. Not that I'm complaining, she added quickly. We make it work with what we have, we always do. The casual comment hit Ethan like a revelation. Here was a woman working miracles with limited resources while he sat on billions that could transform places like Mercy General overnight. The weight of that irony pressed against his chest like a physical ache. Their relationship deepened with each stolen moment. Ethan began timing his delivery routes to coincide with Lily's breaks, and she started looking forward to these visits as the highlight of her day. They discovered shared interests. Both loved old movies and terrible puns. Both were fiercely protective of the people they cared about. Both believed that small acts of kindness could change the world. But with each passing day, the deception grew heavier. When Lily mentioned struggling to afford new scrubs, Ethan had to resist the urge to buy her an entire wardrobe. When she worried about her brother's tuition payment, he fantasized about anonymously funding Jake's entire education. When she talked about dreaming of taking a real vacation someday, he wanted to sweep her away to Paris or Tokyo or anywhere her heart desired. The most difficult moments came when she asked about his life. Ethan had constructed an elaborate fiction. He lived with roommates, he was saving money to start his own business, he'd grown up in a middle-class family that valued hard work over material success. Each lie felt like a betrayal of the trust building between them, but the truth seemed impossible to reveal without losing everything they'd found together. "Tell me about your family," Lily asked one evening as they walked through Riverside Park after her shift. The autumn air was crisp, and she'd wrapped a worn scarf around her neck that Ethan suspected was older than their relationship. "Not much to tell," he said carefully. "My father was very focused on business. We weren't close." "I'm sorry, that must have been hard." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining naturally. "My dad left when I was 16, but before that, he was actually wonderful. Some of my best memories are of him teaching me to change a tire or helping me with homework. I think that's why I'm so determined to help Jake succeed. I want to be the supportive family member our dad should have been." The easy way she shared her pain, the trust implied in her vulnerability, made Ethan's throat tight with emotion. He wanted to tell her about his own complicated relationship with his father, about the pressure of living up to impossible expectations, about how lonely it was to inherit success instead of earning it. But how could he explain that without revealing who he really was? Instead, he squeezed her hand and said, "Jake's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one. Having someone to care about, to work for, it gives everything meaning." She looked up at him, her eyes soft in the lamplight. "I'm starting to think the same thing applies to relationships. Having someone who sees you, really sees you, it changes everything." The words were a gift and a knife simultaneously. Lily thought she saw him, but she was falling in love with a carefully constructed lie. Ethan was falling just as hard, but for the first time in his life, he was truly known by someone, even if that someone didn't know his name, his background, or the resources at his disposal. As they walked back toward her apartment building, Lily's phone buzzed with a text. Her face fell as she read it. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked. "It's from Jake. The university is threatening to drop him from his classes again. The payment plan I set up isn't enough." She tucked the phone away, but not before Ethan saw her hands trembling slightly. "I'll figure something out. I always do." Watching her struggle with problems he could solve with a single phone call was agony. That night, Ethan lay awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling and wondering how long he could maintain this double life. Every day brought them closer together, but it also brought him closer to the moment when his carefully constructed world would collapse. He was falling in love with a woman who believed he was someone else entirely. And the worst part was, the person she thought she loved, kind, hardworking Marcus the delivery driver, felt more real than the billionaire CEO he'd been all his life. The question that haunted him as dawn broke over the city skyline was whether love built on lies could ever become something true, or if he was doomed to lose the best thing that had ever happened to him the moment Lily learned who he really was. 3 weeks into their relationship, the carefully balanced world Ethan had constructed began to crack under pressure from multiple directions. At Vale Industries, Victoria Sterling's patience had reached its breaking point. She'd called an emergency board meeting for Friday afternoon, and the agenda was brutally simple. Vote to accept the Apex merger or initiate proceedings to remove Ethan as CEO. "The shareholders are losing confidence," she announced to the assembled board members, her voice cutting through the tension in the conference room like a blade. "Our stock price has dropped 12% in the past month, while Apex continues to gain market share. We cannot afford to indulge Ethan's sentimental approach to business any longer." David Chang had warned him this was coming, but sitting in that room, listening to his leadership being dissected, felt like watching his father's ghost take over the company all over again. The board members, most of whom had served under Richard Vale, nodded along with Victoria's presentation, their expressions revealing where their loyalties lay. "I'm not asking for more time," Ethan said when Victoria finished her presentation. "I'm asking you to remember what this company stands for. We're not just a balance sheet. We employ 15,000 people who depend on us for their livelihoods, their health care, their children's futures." "Sentiment," Victoria replied dismissively. "Your father understood that business requires hard choices. Apex is offering our shareholders a 30% premium. That's not sentiment, that's mathematics." What she didn't say, but everyone in the room understood, was that accepting the Apex merger would result in massive layoffs. Redundancies, they called it in corporate speak, as if calling it by a different name made the human cost less real. Meanwhile, Lily's world was reaching its own crisis point. Jake's university had given her until Monday to make a substantial payment, or he would be dropped from his classes mid-semester. She'd been working extra shifts, picking up weekend hours, even selling some of her mother's jewelry, but it still wasn't enough. The gap between what she could provide and what her brother needed felt impossibly wide. Ethan learned about the deadline during one of their evening walks, when Lily's phone rang and he watched her face crumble as she listened to the university's financial aid office deliver their ultimatum. "How much do you need?" he asked gently when she hung up, though he already knew the answer would be devastating for her and laughably small for him. $8,000 by Monday morning. Her voice was hollow, defeated. "I've been over the numbers 100 times. Even if I pick up every available shift this weekend. Even if I don't know what else I can do." They were standing under a streetlight in Riverside Park, and Ethan could see tears threatening in her eyes. The woman who faced medical emergencies with steady hands and comforted frightened children with endless patience was finally reaching her breaking point. "Maybe there's another way," Ethan suggested carefully. "Student loans or—" "I've already maxed out everything I qualify for. My credit's not good enough for private loans, and Jake's already carrying more debt than I'm comfortable with." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so vulnerable it made Ethan's chest ache. "I keep thinking about my mom, about the promise I made her before she died. I swore I'd make sure Jake became a doctor, that he'd have the opportunities we never had." The frustration in her voice was palpable, mixed with a guilt that Ethan recognized all too well. She was torturing herself over circumstances beyond her control, just as he'd spent years feeling responsible for his father's legacy and the expectations that came with inheriting billions. "You're not failing him," Ethan said, reaching for her hand. "Look at everything you've already given up, everything you've sacrificed. You're the most dedicated, selfless person I've ever met." Dedicated doesn't pay tuition bills. The bitterness in her voice was unlike anything he'd heard from her before. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just being naive, thinking I can make this work through sheer determination." That night, Ethan barely slept. He drafted a dozen different emails to the university's administration, offering to cover Jake's tuition as an anonymous benefactor. He researched scholarship programs that Vale Industries could fund. He even considered having David arrange for a, quote, delivery error that would result in an envelope of cash accidentally ending up at Lily's apartment. But every scenario led to the same problem: questions he couldn't answer without revealing his true identity. And revealing the truth now, when Lily was at her most vulnerable, felt like the ultimate betrayal. Would she see his help as genuine care, or as wealthy man's attempt to buy his way into her affections? The irony was excruciating. He was one of the richest men in the country, but he was powerless to help the woman he loved because she thought he was someone else entirely. Friday afternoon brought the board meeting Ethan had been dreading. Victoria's presentation was thorough and damning, laying out exactly why the Apex merger was not just advisable, but necessary for the company's survival. When she finished, the room fell silent except for the tick of the antique clock his father had installed decades ago. "Before we vote," Ethan said, standing at the head of the conference table, "I want you to think about why this company exists. Yes, we need to be profitable. Yes, we have responsibilities to our shareholders. But we also have responsibilities to our employees, to our community, to the future we're building." He thought about Lily as he spoke, about her dedication to her patients despite impossible working conditions, about the way she'd sacrificed her own dreams to support her brothers. That was the kind of commitment he wanted from his employees. Not fear-based compliance, but genuine belief in their shared mission. Apex isn't interested in our culture or our values. They want our technology and our market share. If we accept this merger, we're not just selling the company. We're abandoning everyone who believed in what we were trying to build. The vote, when it came, was closer than Victoria had expected, but not close enough. 7 votes for the merger, 5 against. Ethan had 48 hours to reconsider before the decision became final. Walking out of that boardroom, Ethan felt the weight of impending loss pressing down on him from all sides. He was about to lose his company, Lily was about to lose her brother's future, and he was caught between two worlds with no clear path forward. That evening, when Lily texted asking if he wanted to come over for dinner, Ethan stared at the message for a long time before responding. How could he sit in her apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her struggles, knowing he had the power to solve all her problems, but lacked the courage to admit who he really was? But the alternative, staying away when she needed support, felt even worse. So he replied that he'd be there in an hour, and began the familiar ritual of changing from his expensive suit into the delivery uniform that had become his disguise, his shield, and, increasingly, his prison. As he rode through the Riverside district toward Lily's apartment, Ethan realized that time was running out in more ways than one. Monday would bring consequences for both of them, the end of Jake's education and possibly the end of his relationship with the only woman who'd ever loved him for who he truly was, even if she didn't know his real name. The storm that had brought them together was about to be replaced by a different kind of tempest, one that would test whether their connection was strong enough to survive the collision between his world and hers. Sunday evening arrived with the weight of impending doom. Lily had been unusually quiet during dinner, picking at the pasta she'd made while staring out her apartment window at the city lights beyond. Tomorrow was Monday, Jake's deadline, and potentially the end of everything she'd worked for since their mother's death. Ethan sat across from her at the small kitchen table, still wearing his delivery uniform, though he'd finished his actual routes hours ago. The charade felt heavier tonight, each lie sitting like lead in his stomach. His phone had been buzzing all day with messages from David about the board's decision, from Victoria about transition plans, from lawyers about the merger documents. He'd ignored them all, but the corporate world wouldn't wait much longer. "I called Jake this afternoon," Lily said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Told him he should start looking into transferring to a community college, maybe taking a gap year to work and save money." "What did he say?" "He cried." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "This brilliant, strong kid who never complains about anything, and he cried because he thinks he's letting the family down. As if any of this is his fault." Ethan's hands clenched in his lap. With one phone call, he could solve this. One transfer from his personal account. Pocket change to him. Everything to them. But making that call would require explanations he wasn't prepared to give. "Maybe something will work out," he said weakly, hating himself for the hollow comfort. Lily looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her expression made his pulse quicken. "Marcus, can I ask you something? And I need you to be completely honest with me." The request sent ice through his veins. "Of course." "When you look at me struggle with this, when you see me falling apart over money, does it ever occur to you that maybe you could help? Not that you should," she added quickly, "but just, do you ever wish you could do more?" The question was innocent enough on the surface, but Ethan could hear the undercurrent of something else. Suspicion? Hope? He wasn't sure which would be worse. "I wish I could help with everything," he said carefully, "but I'm just a delivery driver. I barely make enough to cover my own expenses." Something flickered in Lily's eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. She nodded and turned back to her untouched dinner, but the moment felt charged with unspoken thoughts. They were interrupted by the sound of Lily's phone ringing. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Jake. That's weird. He never calls this late on Sunday." She answered with forced cheerfulness. "Hey, little brother. What's up?" Ethan watched her face change as she listened, confusion giving way to shock, then to something that looked almost like fear. "What do you mean, paid in full? Jake, that's impossible. Are you sure you're reading it correctly?" She paused, listening. "Anonymous benefactor? That doesn't make sense. Nobody just pays random college tuitions." Ethan's blood turned to ice. This couldn't be happening. He'd been so careful not to interfere, but someone else clearly had. "Hold on," Lily said into the phone, then looked at Ethan with wide, questioning eyes. "Jake says someone paid his entire tuition for the rest of his degree. Not just this semester, everything. Plus they established a scholarship fund in our mother's name for other pre-med students." The room seemed to spin around Ethan. He hadn't done this, which meant someone else knew about Lily's situation. Someone with resources and knowledge of his personal life. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. David. His assistant had been watching, listening, connecting dots. And in a misguided attempt to help, David had just destroyed everything. That's incredible," Ethan managed, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Lily was still on the phone with Jake, trying to get more details, but the university's automated payment system had logged the transaction without providing information about the donor. As she talked, she kept glancing at Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite read. When she finally hung up, the silence in the apartment was deafening. "Marcus," she said slowly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Do you know anything about this? Why would I know anything about it? The lie came automatically, but it felt like ash in his mouth. Because, Lily said, standing up from the table, in the past 3 weeks, every major problem in my life has somehow gotten better right after I mention it to you. First, that broken washing machine in the building's laundry room got mysteriously fixed the day after I complained about it. Then Mrs. Chen downstairs got that expensive heart medication she couldn't afford delivered to her door with no explanation. And now this. Ethan's mind raced. He'd had nothing to do with those other incidents either, but clearly David had been very busy playing guardian angel. Lily, I think you're connecting dots that aren't there. Am I? She pulled out her laptop and opened it, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Because I started wondering about you 3 days ago, Marcus. Really wondering. You speak like someone with an expensive education. You know things about business and technology that delivery drivers don't typically know. And you have this way of looking at problems like they're puzzles to be solved rather than insurmountable obstacles. She turned the laptop screen toward him, and Ethan's world collapsed. The Millbrook Business Journal's website filled the screen, featuring a headline about Vale Industries' potential merger. And there, in a photo from last month's tech conference, was Ethan Vale in his corporate attire, shaking hands with another CEO. Your name isn't Marcus, is it? Lily's voice was steady, but he could see the tremor in her hands. It's Ethan Vale, you're the CEO of Vale Industries. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Ethan stared at the screen, at his own face betraying him, and felt the careful walls he'd built crumbling to dust. Lily, I can explain. Can you? She closed the laptop with a sharp snap. Can you explain why a billionaire CEO has been lying to me for 3 weeks? Can you explain why you've been playing dress-up, pretending to be someone you're not while I poured my heart out to you about problems you could solve with pocket change? The pain in her voice was worse than any boardroom confrontation he'd ever faced. It wasn't like that. It wasn't a game. Then what was it? Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. What was this to you, Ethan? Some kind of social experiment? Research for your next charitable foundation? I was drowning in that world, he said desperately. The corporate pressure, the board wanting to destroy everything I'd built, the isolation of never knowing if people cared about me or just my money. When I met you, when you looked at me like I was just a normal person worth talking to, it was the first time in years I felt real. But it wasn't real. The words exploded out of her. Nothing about this was real. Every conversation we had, every moment I thought we were connecting, every time I trusted you with my fears and dreams, it was all built on lies. She was right, and they both knew it. The beautiful, fragile thing they'd built together was shattering before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The person you fell in love with, Lily continued, her voice breaking now, doesn't exist. Marcus, the delivery driver, the man who understood struggle and worked hard for everything he had, that person is a fiction. You're a billionaire who's been slumming it for entertainment. That's not true, Ethan pleaded. Yes, I lied about my identity, but everything else was real. My feelings for you, the way you made me want to be better. Get out. The words were quiet but final. Lily, please. Get out. She was sobbing now, pointing toward the door. I can't look at you right now. I can't think of anything but how stupid I've been. How completely I believed in someone who doesn't exist. Ethan stood slowly, every movement feeling like he was tearing something inside himself. At the door, he turned back one last time. I love you, he said quietly. That was never a lie. But the door was already closing, and with it any hope that the best thing in his life could survive the weight of his deception. The rain had returned to Millbrook, as if the city itself was mourning the destruction of something beautiful. Lily stood in her empty apartment, staring at the closed door for what felt like hours after Ethan left. The silence was deafening. No more texts lighting up her phone, no more anticipation of his voice in the hallway, no more warmth of shared conversations over simple meals. She sank onto her couch, still wearing the same clothes from dinner, and let the full weight of the betrayal wash over her. Every memory felt tainted now. His expensive vocabulary that she'd found charming. Of course it was expensive. He probably had degrees from elite universities. His confident way of discussing business concepts. Naturally, He ran a billion-dollar company. Even his gentle hands, that had never seemed roughened by manual labor, made sense now in the cruelest possible way. How had she been so blind? The signs were there, scattered throughout their relationship like breadcrumbs leading to an obvious conclusion. But she'd been so desperate for connection, so grateful for someone who seemed to understand her world, that she'd ignored every red flag in favor of believing in a beautiful lie. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Lily, I can't believe this happened. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and it'll all be a dream. Who do you think could have done this?" She stared at the message, unable to type a response. How could she explain that her brother's miracle was the result of her romantic humiliation? That some billionaire had been playing at poverty while watching her family struggle, only to swoop in with financial salvation when it served his purposes? The next morning brought no relief. Lily called in sick to work for the first time in over a year, unable to face the concerned questions from colleagues or the demanding needs of her young patients. She needed time to process, to figure out how to rebuild her sense of reality after having it completely shattered. But the luxury of wallowing was interrupted by a knock at her door. Through the peephole, she saw Jake standing in the hallway, his face creased with worry. She'd forgotten he was driving down from campus to thank her in person for somehow solving their financial crisis. "Lily?" Jake's voice carried through the door. "I know you're in there. Mrs. Chen told me you didn't go to work today. Are you sick?" She opened the door reluctantly, knowing she looked terrible, red-eyed, still in yesterday's clothes, her usually neat apartment in disarray around her. "Oh my God, what happened?" Jake immediately pulled her into a hug, his 20-year-old frame surprisingly solid and comforting. "You look like someone died." In a way, someone had. The Marcus she'd fallen in love with had never existed, and Ethan Vale, the real man behind the mask, was a stranger whose motivations she couldn't begin to understand. Over coffee that tasted like ash, Lily found herself telling Jake everything. Her little brother listened with the same focused attention he brought to his medical studies, asking clarifying questions but never interrupting the painful narrative. When she finished, Jake was quiet for a long time. "So this guy," he said finally, "this billionaire CEO, he's the one who paid for my education?" "I think so. I can't prove it, but the timing is too coincidental." Lily wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, seeking warmth that wouldn't come. "I think his assistant has been watching, trying to solve my problems without him having to break character." Jake processed this information with the analytical mind that would make him an excellent doctor someday. "Lily, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about the answer. When you were with him, when you thought he was Marcus, were you happy?" The question caught her off guard. What does that matter now? It matters because happiness is rare, and real connection is even rarer. I've watched you sacrifice everything for my future, and in all that time, I've never seen you light up the way you did when you talked about this guy. But it was all fake, Jake. Everything I thought I knew about him was a lie. Was it? Jake leaned forward, his expression earnest. Or was the only lie his identity? Think about it. His kindness to you, the way he listened, the way he cared about your work and your dreams. Can you fake that kind of attention? That kind of emotional investment? Lily wanted to dismiss Jake's words, to hold onto her anger as a shield against the pain, but her brother had always been perceptive, even as a child. It doesn't matter what was real. The foundation of our entire relationship was built on deception. Maybe. Or maybe he was just as trapped by his circumstances as you were by yours. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan sat in his office staring at merger documents he couldn't bring himself to read. The 48 hours Victoria had given him were nearly up, and he'd spent most of them replaying every moment of his confrontation with Lily, searching for something he could have said differently, some way he could have made her understand. David had been avoiding him since Sunday night, when Ethan had called to demand an explanation for the anonymous tuition payment. His assistant's well-intentioned meddling had destroyed the most important relationship of Ethan's life, but he couldn't even summon the energy to be properly angry. The fault was his own for creating a situation where such interference seemed necessary. Victoria Sterling appeared in his doorway at precisely 3 p.m., flanked by 2 lawyers and carrying a leather portfolio that undoubtedly contained his corporate death warrant. "Time's up, Ethan," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "The board has voted, and the Apex merger will proceed with or without your cooperation. You can sign these documents voluntarily, or we can proceed with the vote of no confidence. Either way, your romantic experiment in leadership is over. Ethan looked at the documents she placed before him. The dissolution of everything he'd tried to build, the end of his father's legacy, and perhaps his only path back to the man Lily had fallen in love with. The irony wasn't lost on him that losing his company might be the only way to become the person he'd pretended to be. "There is a third option," Victoria continued, her tone deceptively casual. "Accept the merger, step down as CEO, and we'll arrange for a generous severance package. You can walk away from all of this corporate responsibility that clearly doesn't suit you." For the first time in days, Ethan felt something other than numbness. It was anger. Pure, clean anger at Victoria's dismissive tone, at the board's cowardice, at a system that valued profit over people. But underneath the anger was something else. Clarity. "You're right about one thing, Victoria," he said, pushing the unsigned documents back across his desk. "I'm not suited for this kind of corporate leadership. But that doesn't mean I'm giving up." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city where somewhere a woman who'd changed his life was trying to piece together a future without him. "I'm calling an emergency shareholders meeting for Friday. If the board wants to remove me, they can explain to our investors why they're destroying a profitable company to line their own pockets." "You're bluffing," Victoria said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "Try me." Ethan turned back to face her, and for the first time since becoming CEO, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. "I built this company into what it is today, and I'm not handing it over to corporate raiders without a fight." As Victoria gathered her documents and left his office in frustrated defeat, Ethan realized something had shifted inside him. The man Lily had fallen in love with, Marcus, the idealistic dreamer who believed business could be a force for good, wasn't entirely fictional. That man had always existed within Ethan Vale. He'd just been buried under years of corporate pressure and family expectations. Whether he could save his company remained to be seen. Whether he could win back Lily's trust seemed impossible. But for the first time since inheriting his father's empire, Ethan knew exactly who he wanted to be, and he was finally ready to fight for it. The question was whether fighting for his principles would be enough to earn a second chance with the woman who'd shown him what those principles were worth. The emergency shareholders meeting that Friday morning was unlike anything Vale Industries had ever witnessed. The conference hall buzzed with tension as investors, board members, and financial reporters packed into seats, all drawn by rumors of corporate upheaval and a CEO fighting for his professional life. Ethan stood at the podium, no longer the polished executive in an expensive suit, but something rawer and more authentic, a man with nothing left to lose except his integrity. "5 years ago, I inherited this company from my father," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "Richard Vale built Vale Industries on the principle that profit justifies any cost. I spent the past 5 years trying to prove that principle wrong, and today, you get to decide whether compassion has a place in corporate America." Victoria Sterling sat in the front row, her expression carefully neutral, but Ethan could see the calculations running behind her eyes. She'd expected him to cave under pressure, to sign the merger documents and fade quietly into wealthy obscurity. Instead, he was forcing a public reckoning. "The board wants you to believe that our employee-first policies are unsustainable," Ethan continued, clicking to his first slide. "But our productivity is up 18% since we implemented profit sharing. Our employee retention rate is the highest in the tech sector. Our customer satisfaction scores consistently outperform our competitors, including Apex Corporation." He could see heads nodding in the audience. Investors who'd been told that his leadership was destroying the company, now seeing evidence to the contrary. The Apex merger isn't about saving Vale Industries. It's about eliminating a competitor whose values-based approach threatens their business model. For 45 minutes, Ethan laid out his vision for the company's future, complete with projected revenues, expansion plans, and a comprehensive strategy for maintaining their competitive edge without sacrificing their principles. It was the presentation of his life, delivered not from corporate obligation but from genuine passion. When he finished, the questions came fast and sharp. One investor asked about short-term profitability. Another questioned whether his quote, sentimental approach could survive economic downturns. Each question felt like a test of everything he'd learned about balancing idealism with pragmatism. "Mr. Vale," called a voice from the back of the room, "your critics say you're trying to run a business like a charity. How do you respond to that?" Ethan thought of Lily, of her dedication to her patients despite impossible working conditions, of the way she'd sacrificed her own dreams to support her brother's future. I'd say that taking care of the people who make your success possible isn't charity. It's good business. When employees know they're valued as human beings, not just resources to be optimized, they give you their best work, their innovation, their loyalty. That's not sentimental. That's strategic. The vote, when it came, was closer than anyone had expected. 52% in favor of retaining Ethan as CEO, 48% supporting the Apex merger. It wasn't a landslide, but it was enough. Victoria's carefully orchestrated coup had failed, and with it her influence over the company her father had helped build. As investors filed out of the conference hall, many stopping to congratulate Ethan on his presentation, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just for his company, but for the possibility that he could become the kind of leader, the kind of man, that Lily had believed Marcus to be. Meanwhile, Lily was facing her own moment of reckoning 3 blocks away at Mercy General Hospital. She'd returned to work that morning despite Jake's suggestion that she take more time to process, needing the familiar rhythm of patient care to ground her in something real and meaningful. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. In the pediatric ward, she found herself assigned to a new patient, 8-year-old Emma Castillo, whose family had driven 6 hours from a rural town because Mercy General was the only hospital in the region that could perform the specialized heart surgery Emma needed. The catch was that the family's insurance had been denied, and they were facing a medical bill that would bankrupt them. "We'll figure something out," Lily assured Emma's parents, Maria and Carlos, though she wasn't sure how. The hospital's charity care program had been cut due to budget constraints, and cases like Emma's fell through the cracks of an overburdened system. It was Dr. Peterson who pulled Lily aside during her lunch break with news that made her head spin. "The strangest thing happened this morning," he said, consulting his tablet. "Our charity care fund just received a massive anonymous donation, enough to cover every uninsured pediatric case for the next year. The donor specifically requested that the funds be administered through our nursing staff, with you overseeing the program." Lily stared at him, her mind immediately jumping to the most obvious explanation. Did the donor leave any other instructions? Just one. They said the program should be called the Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund. Dr. Peterson looked puzzled. "Do you know anyone by that name?" Sarah Thompson. Lily's hands trembled as she remembered Ethan Marcus mentioning his mother during one of their walks, how she'd taught him that business should be about more than profit margins. Even now, even after everything, he was trying to take care of her patients, trying to solve problems in her world while respecting her professional autonomy. That evening, Lily found herself standing outside Vale Industries headquarters, staring up at the gleaming tower that housed Ethan's office. She'd taken the subway downtown without really deciding to, driven by a need to see his world as he truly lived it, not as he'd presented it to her. The building was impressive in a cold, corporate way, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky, with a marble lobby that could have housed her entire apartment building. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see suited figures moving with purpose, conducting the kind of high-stakes business that determined the fate of thousands of employees and millions of dollars. This was Ethan's real world, not cozy apartments and shared Chinese takeout, but boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. How had she ever believed that someone from this rarefied atmosphere could genuinely connect with her modest, service-oriented life? But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye. On a news ticker scrolling across the building's facade, she saw Vale Industries, CEO Ethan Vale defeats hostile takeover, pledges to maintain employee-first policies. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Did you see the news about your billionaire? Sounds like he chose principles over profit. Maybe you should read the full article." Lily looked up at the building one more time, then at her phone, then at the people streaming past her on the busy sidewalk, all of them with their own stories, their own struggles, their own complicated truths. For the first time since Sunday night, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that the story between her and Ethan might be more complex than betrayal and deception. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe the question wasn't whether Ethan had lied about his identity, but whether the man she'd fallen in love with existed within the billionaire CEO, waiting to be discovered and accepted in all his complicated reality. The question that remained was whether she had the courage to find out. 2 weeks after the shareholders' meeting, Lily found herself in the most unlikely of places, the executive elevator of Vale Industries. rising toward the 42nd floor with a pounding heart and sweaty palms. She clutched a manila envelope containing every thank you card, every photo, every piece of documentation about the Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund's impact on her young patients. If she was going to do this, if she was going to confront Ethan and demand the truth about his motivations, she needed armor made of the very work that had brought them together. The elevator opened into a reception area that screamed expensive minimalism. The woman behind the sleek desk looked up with the polished smile of someone trained to handle billionaire CEOs and their equally important visitors. "I'm here to see Ethan Vale," Lily said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I don't have an appointment, but it's about the Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund." Something flickered in the receptionist's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or surprise. "I'll see if Mr. Vale is available. May I have your name?" "Lily Ashford." The woman's professional mask slipped for just a moment, replaced by what looked like understanding. She spoke quietly into her headset, then looked up with a softer expression. "He'll see you right away. Take the hallway to your left, last door at the end." Lily's legs felt unsteady as she walked down the corridor lined with modern art and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. At the end of the hall, she paused before a door marked Ethan Vale, Chief Executive Officer, and took a deep breath before knocking. "Come in!" The voice was unmistakably his, but when she opened the door, the man behind the massive desk looked different from both versions of him she'd known. He wasn't the polished CEO from the newspaper photos, nor was he Marcus, the delivery driver, in his borrowed uniform. Instead, he wore a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He looked tired, but more real than she'd ever seen him. When he saw her, Ethan's expression shifted through a dozen emotions in seconds: surprise, hope, wariness, and something that might have been relief. "Lily." He stood slowly, as if sudden movements might cause her to disappear. I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again." "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, closing the door behind her. The office was enormous, with a conference table that could seat 20 and windows that offered a panoramic view of Millbrook. But what caught her attention was the smaller, more personal space near the windows: a reading chair, a simple desk covered with papers, and, on the wall, a framed photo from what looked like a company picnic, employees and their families scattered across a park. "Thank you for seeing me," Lily continued, moving further into the room but maintaining the distance between them. "I wanted to talk about the Memorial Fund." Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What about it?" 8 children have received life-saving surgeries because of that donation. Emma Castillo, the little girl I told you about that night, she's going home tomorrow with a healthy heart. Lily pulled out a photo from her envelope, a picture of Emma grinning post-surgery with a teddy bear nearly as big as she was. "Her parents wanted me to thank whoever made this possible." "I'm glad she's okay," Ethan said carefully, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Why did you name it after your mother?" The question hung in the air between them. For a long moment, Ethan stood silent, his gaze focused on something beyond the windows. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Because she would have loved what you do. Sarah Thompson believed that our success was meaningless if we didn't use it to help others. She died when I was 22, and I spent the next 10 years forgetting that lesson, getting buried in corporate strategy and profit margins." He turned to face her then, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. "Being with you reminded me of what she taught me. The fund was my way of honoring both of your legacies." Lily set the envelope on his desk, her hands trembling slightly. "Ethan, I need to understand something. When you were Marcus, when we talked about your dreams of starting a business that mattered, was any of that real?" "All of it." The answer came without hesitation. "The man you knew as Marcus, the one who wanted to build something meaningful, who believed business could be a force for good. He's not a character I was playing. He's who I am underneath all the corporate expectations and family pressure." "But you have a billion-dollar company. You don't need to start a business. You already run one." Ethan gestured toward the conference table where stacks of documents waited. "I run a company my father built, following strategies other people developed, answering to a board that cares more about quarterly profits than long-term impact. That's not the same as building something from scratch, something that reflects your own values." He moved to the smaller desk by the windows, picking up what looked like a business plan. "This is what I've been working on since the shareholders' meeting. A new division of Vale Industries focused entirely on social impact, affordable healthcare technology, educational programs, community development. It would operate with its own budget, its own staff, its own mission. Lily found herself stepping closer, drawn despite herself to the passion in his voice. Like the restaurant you used to dream about. Exactly like that. A place where profit serves purpose instead of the other way around. He set the papers down and looked at her directly. Lily, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I lied to you about who I was, and that betrayal is inexcusable. But I need you to know that everything else was real. The way I felt about you, the way you inspired me to be better, the way you showed me what kind of leader I wanted to be, none of that was fake. Tears were threatening now, but Lily forced herself to stay focused. The night I found out the truth, you said you were drowning in your corporate world. If that's really how you feel, why stay? Why not walk away and start over? Because walking away would be the easy solution, and easy solutions don't create lasting change. Ethan's voice grew stronger, more certain. I have resources and influence that could help thousands of people. Walking away from that responsibility because it's complicated or difficult wouldn't make me the man you fell in love with. It would make me a coward. The truth of his words hit her like a revelation. She thought about her own choice to stay at Mercy General, despite better-paying opportunities elsewhere. Her decision to sacrifice her own dreams to support Jake's education. They were both people who chose the difficult path when it served a greater purpose. There's something else, Ethan continued, his voice softer now. Something I should have told you that night, but didn't know how. Being with you didn't just remind me of my mother's values. It taught me what love actually feels like. Not the strategic relationships I'd had before, but real love. The kind that makes you want to be worthy of the person who sees the best in you. Lily looked around his office again, seeing it differently now, not as a symbol of wealth and power, but as a tool he was learning to use for good. The framed photo from the company picnic, the business plan for social impact, even the simple way he'd chosen to dress today. It all spoke to someone trying to integrate the different parts of himself into something authentic. I don't know if I can trust you again, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I know, Ethan replied. But I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to earn it back. Not as Marcus, the delivery driver, and not as Ethan Vale, the billionaire CEO, but as the man I'm learning to be when I combine the best parts of both. Standing in that office high above the city, Lily realized that the question wasn't whether she could forgive him for lying. The question was whether she was brave enough to love someone whose life was infinitely more complicated than anything she'd ever imagined, and whether he was ready to love her exactly as she was, a pediatric nurse from Riverside who would always choose service over status, who would challenge him to stay grounded even as his world expanded. The answer she was beginning to understand might determine not just their future together, but the kind of people they would become. 6 months later, the grand opening of the Vale Community Impact Center felt like a celebration of impossible things becoming real. The converted warehouse in the Riverside district buzzed with activity as families, healthcare workers, business leaders, and community members gathered to witness something unprecedented. A billionaire CEO's company opening a facility dedicated entirely to serving those who needed it most. Lily stood near the entrance, wearing her best dress and a smile that hadn't left her face all day, watching Ethan cut the ribbon alongside Dr. Peterson and several other Mercy General staff members. The center housed a free clinic, a job training program, a small business incubator, and in the space that made her heart swell with pride, a fully equipped pediatric care facility that would serve as an overflow for the hospital's overburdened children's ward. Hard to believe this all started with Chinese takeout, Jake said, appearing beside her with a grin. He looked older, more confident in his second year of medical school, already talking about specializing in pediatric cardiology so he could work with patients like the ones who had benefited from the Sarah Thompson Memorial Fund. Actually, Lily replied, watching Ethan field questions from reporters about his company's new direction. It started with a woman too stubborn to let her brother's dreams die and a man brave enough to step outside his comfort zone. The past 6 months hadn't been easy. Rebuilding trust required daily choices, constant communication, and the willingness to be vulnerable in ways that terrified them both. Ethan had insisted on complete transparency, showing her board meeting notes, including her in decisions about the Impact Center, even giving her access to his calendar so she always knew where he was and what he was doing. For her part, Lily had to learn to navigate the complexities of loving someone whose every decision was scrutinized by shareholders, reporters, and employees. She'd attended corporate events where she felt completely out of place, learned to ignore tabloid speculation about their relationship, and discovered that dating a CEO meant accepting a level of public attention she'd never wanted. Hey, but they'd also found moments of unexpected joy. Ethan kept a small apartment in Riverside, close enough to walk to the Impact Center, where they could have quiet dinners and movie nights without the pressure of his corporate world. Lily had learned to appreciate the good that came with his resources, not just the medical fund and community center, but scholarship programs, environmental initiatives, and employee benefits that had made Vale Industries a model for ethical business practices. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan's voice carried across the crowd as he stepped up to the microphone for his dedication speech. 6 months ago, I thought I knew what leadership meant. I thought it was about making tough decisions in boardrooms and maximizing shareholder value. Then I met someone who showed me that real leadership is about service, about using whatever resources you have to lift others up. His eyes found Lily in the crowd, and the smile he gave her was the same one that had made her fall in love with a delivery driver on a rainy night. The Vale Community Impact Center exists because a pediatric nurse named Lily Ashford taught me that the most important measure of success isn't how much wealth you accumulate, but how many lives you touch in meaningful ways. The applause was thunderous, but Lily barely heard it. She was thinking about the children who would receive care in this facility, the families who would find support here, the small business owners who would get their start in the incubator program. Most of all, she was thinking about the man on the stage who had learned to integrate every part of himself into someone she could love without reservation. After the formal ceremony, as the crowd dispersed to tour the facility, Ethan found Lily in the pediatric wing, where she was already planning improvements to the layout based on her experience at Mercy General. Having second thoughts about the design, he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Just thinking about how to make it even better, she replied, leaning back against his chest. Dr. Peterson wants to rotate some of our staff here part-time, create more opportunities for specialized care. Whatever you think is best, this is your domain. I'm just the guy who writes the checks. Lily turned in his arms, studying his face with the same careful attention she'd once given to a mysterious delivery driver. Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of being Marcus? Ethan considered the question seriously as he did all her inquiries about his journey from deception to authenticity. I miss the freedom of being anonymous sometimes. But I wouldn't trade who I am now for who I was then. Marcus was just one part of me, the part that dreamed of making a difference. This version gets to actually do it. And do you ever regret telling me the truth? Even knowing how much pain it caused? Never. His answer was immediate and certain. The pain was necessary. It forced us both to decide whether we were brave enough to love each other as we really are, complications and all. As if summoned by their conversation, David Chang appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, an expression apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but the Times reporter wants a quote about the expansion plans, and the board meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning. It was a reminder that their love story existed within the larger context of corporate responsibility and public scrutiny. But instead of feeling overwhelmed by the intrusion, Lily felt grounded by the routine of it. This was their life, not the fairy tale simplicity she'd once imagined, but something richer and more complex. Go, she said, straightening Ethan's tie with familiar affection. Handle your CEO duties. I'll be here planning how to save the world one sick child at a time. That's why I love you, Ethan said, kissing her forehead before following David toward the reporters. As Lily watched him go, she reflected on how different this moment was from their first meeting. Then, she'd been an exhausted nurse, grateful for any kindness from a stranger. Now, she was a woman who'd learned to love someone not despite his complexity, but because of it. She'd discovered that real love wasn't about finding someone who fit perfectly into your existing life, but about growing together into people worthy of the life you wanted to build. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma Castillo's mother. Emma drew you a picture of her new heart. She says it's extra strong because it was fixed with love. Standing in the pediatric wing of a community center that existed because a billionaire fell in love with a nurse's dedication to healing, Lily smiled and typed back, "Tell her that hearts fixed with love are the strongest kind." Outside, the sun was setting over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the Riverside district, families were sitting down to dinner, children were being tucked into bed, and ordinary people were living ordinary lives touched by extraordinary love. And in a converted warehouse that smelled of fresh paint and new possibilities, a woman who'd learned to trust again was planning to heal the world, one heart at a time. Some love stories, Lily thought as she heard Ethan's laughter echo from the main hall, begin with deception, but end with the rarest kind of truth, the kind that transforms not just two hearts, but everyone those hearts touch along the way. In the end, perhaps that was the most beautiful twist of all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.